I stood on my porch, the warning notice trembling in my hand as the morning sun stretched long shadows across the dewy grass. A low rumble began to swell from the end of my gravel driveway. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly what it was, the bulldozer, and it was headed straight for my great-great-grandfather's well. The massive machine turned onto my property like a yellow beast awakening from a long slumber, its treads crunching over the pebbled path as it slowly made its way around to the back. The driver barely glanced at me. He didn't need to. He was only doing what he was told. And those orders, as always, came from Crescent Ridge HOA, specifically from Karen Matthews, the HOA president, who stood there at the edge of my fence, clipboard in hand, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and a plastic smile colder than January frost. She was watching me, her arms folded tight, like a general surveying her troops. I could feel her smirk from 30 feet away. "This isn't personal, Amanda," she called, as if she had said it 100 times before. "You've been given every opportunity to comply." "Comply?" I repeated, voice rising. "You're telling me to destroy history? That well has been here since 1874. It served 5 generations of my family, in this town, through droughts, wars, even a cholera outbreak. And now you call a violation?" Karen didn't flinch. "It's unpermitted, unsealed, and structurally dangerous. You've been warned 3 times. We're authorized under HOA Code 6.3.2 to remove non-compliant structures at the owner's expense." I took a shaky breath and stepped off the porch, walking toward the old stone well, like I had done 1,000 times before. The stones, worn smooth by a century and a half of Kentucky weather, glistened faintly in the sun. A hawk cried out overhead, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. This wasn't just a well. It was the soul of my family. My great-great-grandfather, Elijah Becker, had dug it himself by hand using a pickaxe. In the heat and sweat of a long summer, he hauled the stones from the creek bed, laid each one in place, and sealed them with a mixture of clay and faith. For decades, it had watered our gardens, quenched our livestock, and filled our wash basins. It's where my grandmother taught me how to crank a bucket without spilling, where my father washed his hands after plowing, and where my children tossed coins and made wishes. And now, Karen wanted it gone because it didn't match the HOA's aesthetic. The bulldozer was less than 20 feet from the well. I stepped between them, arms stretched out wide, like an old oak refusing to fall. "Turn around," I said, my voice calm but firm. The driver mumbled from inside the cab, "Ma'am, I've got orders." I took another step forward, my voice rising, hands shaking with fury. "Let me make this real clear for you. If you put that blade into my family's well, you'll be on the front page of the Brookhaven Weekly under the headline, 'HOA Destroys Town Landmark.' And you know what? That'll be the mild version." Karen's face twitched. "You don't scare me with your little stories and family tales." "Amanda, you're a part of this community now, and that means our rules apply to everyone," Karen said, her tone dripping with authority. I turned to face her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" Karen blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "You're a retired teacher, right? That's all I know." I stepped forward, eyes locked on hers. "I'm Amanda Becker, chairwoman of the Brookhaven Historical Society. I sit on the State Heritage Board and have overseen the designation of 22 historic sites across this county, including 5 that have less significance than this well." The air around us seemed to freeze, and I could see the bulldozer idling in the background. A mockingbird chirped from the fence post, as though waiting for Karen's response. Her gaze shifted, realizing she might have underestimated me. "You're bluffing," she said, her confidence faltering. I smiled softly. "Try me." "You see," I continued, "this well isn't just a pile of rocks in my backyard. It's the very heart of my family's history, built through hard work, pride, and generations of memories. My great-great-grandfather, Elijah Becker, dug this well by hand in 1874, right after the Civil War. Back then, Brookhaven was nothing more than tough soil, timber, and people too proud to ask for help. The creek had dried up for 2 consecutive summers, and people were hauling water for miles just to survive." I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in before continuing. Elijah chose the south side of property, drove a flag into the earth, and said, "Right here, we dig." It took him 3 weeks. No machines, no surveyors, just a pickaxe, shovel, and a homemade pulley system. And after 3 weeks, he struck sweet, cold groundwater, clear as glass, clean enough to drink straight from the earth. The bulldozer rumbled behind me. But I didn't flinch. This well kept my family alive through hardships like the Dust Bowl, providing water for the garden, our livestock, and for cooking. My grandmother used to lower mason jars down the rope basket to keep the sweet tea cold during summer. By the time I was a child in the 1960s, the town had grown, but our wealth remained rooted in that well. Our wealth was never measured by money, but by the reliability of our land. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "So what? This well is supposed to be a symbol of your family's legacy?" she scoffed. I continued, undeterred. After nearly 70 years of life, and 2 years into my retirement, I thought I was finally going to get some peace. But then Karen moved in and everything changed. "Karen," I said, allowing the word to sink in. She showed up around 2021, just as a new development across Sycamore Lane started. Folks from out of state, Ohio, maybe Illinois, moved in and decided they didn't like the rural charm of Brookhaven. Too many sagging porches, too many old sheds, and not enough gray vinyl siding or petunia borders. They filed to form Crescent Ridge HOA, thinking they'd bring order to the chaos. At first, I didn't think it would affect me. My house and land had been here long, before any of the cookie-cutter homes or strip malls that surrounded it. My property had stood untouched, a cornerstone of history, predating every single building in a mile radius. But they pushed relentlessly, reworking their boundary map, and somehow managed to loop my entire homestead into the Crescent Ridge HOA's control. Now, technically, according to their newly revised bylaws, I was under their jurisdiction. It felt like a bad dream unfolding, as their lawyers' letters started arriving in my mailbox. Initially, I tried to ignore it. The notices were mostly small annoyances. Your mailbox must be repainted to match HOA standards. Outdoor lighting fixtures need to be uniform and energy efficient. No drying laundry on front porches. I wasn't interested in following their petty rules. After all, I had a rotary phone that was older than most of their regulations. But the notices didn't stop. They kept coming day after day, wearing me down. Then came the one that really hit a nerve. The open stone water well located on your property has been deemed an aesthetic and structural hazard. It must be covered with an approved HOA safety lid, repainted to neutral tones, or removed entirely within 14 business days. Remove it? Remove a structure that had been part of my family's history since 1874? A well older than the state capitol's roof shingles? The very heart of my ancestors' hard work? I couldn't believe it. But this wasn't about logic for Karen. It was about control. At first, I tried to play nice. I invited Karen over for sweet tea on the porch, just like Mama taught me. I showed her historical plaques, photos from 1903 of my grandfather drawing water from the well, and told her how local school children used to visit the well during field trips, learning about our community's heritage. I hoped she'd see the value in what I was preserving. But Karen barely sipped her drink, wrinkling her nose and saying it was too sweet. She didn't care about history or tradition. Instead, she told me that she had a vision for modernizing community. If I didn't remove the well voluntarily, she said they would bring in a contract to demolish it, and I'd be billed for the costs. I wasn't having any of it. I sent a certified letter in response, attaching documentation from the State Historical Registry that designated the well as a contributing resource of regional cultural significance. That was 2 weeks ago. Then, I received violation notice number 2. Karen's response was as predictable as it was maddening. She claimed the well wasn't officially registered with the HOA's planning committee, and therefore, its historical designation wasn't relevant to their enforcement actions. I laughed, then I cried. It was like a slap in the face. I called the city zoning office, hoping for some clarity, but they told me Crescent Ridge was a private HOA, and they had no jurisdiction unless legal action was taken. So, I reached out to a local attorney. He squinted at the paperwork, taking his time before responding. "Ma'am, it's murky, but you've got something here, especially with that heritage clause. You sure you want to fight this?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "That well's older than any man in this town. I'm not letting some HOA clipboard queen bulldoze it without a fight." It wasn't long before they escalated things. In the 4th week, Karen filed an immediate compliance order. She claimed the well posed a public danger to neighborhood children. Never mind that no child had set foot on my land in over a decade. This was just another excuse to try to force me into submission. They even had the audacity to label my great-great-grandfather as well as a nuisance structure. Then one morning, I walked into my backyard to find 3 HOA representatives standing there. They had clipboards, measuring tapes, and a camera, looking like they were planning an inspection. I marched over my robe, shotgun in hand, not loaded, of course, but they didn't know that, and said, "You've got 3 seconds to explain what you're doing before I call the sheriff." They stammered out something about site assessments and preliminary hazard reports. I told them they had no legal right to be on my property. One of them tried to argue that they had HOA clearance. I shot back, "HOA isn't the sheriff's badge, honey." They left, but I knew they'd be back. That night, I sat on my porch watching fireflies flicker around the old oak tree. The air was thick with the weight of generations, their presence surrounding me like a comforting blanket. It was in that quiet moment that I decided they picked the wrong woman to mess with. Word started spreading. A few of my neighbors, families that had been in Brookhaven longer than the streetlights, came by to offer quiet support. Mrs. Nellie from down Sycamore baked me an apple pie and said, "You hold your ground, honey. That well is part of this town's soul." But not everyone was on my side. A younger couple, real estate agents, I think, left a note in my mailbox. It read, "We support the HOA. Structures like that lower neighborhood value." Lower value? That well had more historical worth than their 2-car garage and fake lawn combined. Still, I could feel the town dividing. Some folks began avoiding eye contact at the general store. A few unsubscribed from the Brookhaven Historical Society newsletter. The battle lines were being drawn, and my backyard had become the front line. Late one evening, as cicadas hummed in the trees, I stood beside the well and ran my fingers along its stones. Some were chipped, a few had moss creeping through the cracks, but it was strong. It had survived ice storms, floods, and even lightning once, back in 1980. I whispered, "You're not going down on my watch." I went inside, dusted off the folder labeled Brookhaven Heritage Act 1981, and began gathering every document, photo, witness statement, and registry letter I could find. I knew the next time they came for that well, I wouldn't just be standing in their way. I'd be standing there with the law behind me. By the time the HOA's bulldozer rolled up for the second time, the sun hadn't even cleared the ridge. But this time, I wasn't standing on that porch alone. Word had gotten out. A former student of mine, now a local news anchor, had picked up the story from the Brookhaven Historical Society's bulletin. The news piece aired that Tuesday night on Channel 6. It was just a short clip, an image of the well, with a voiceover about an elderly woman fighting to preserve her family's 150-year-old heritage against HOA regulations. The phone started ringing off the hook. By Friday morning, I had 3 reporters parked in my driveway, 2 retired professors from the state university offering legal assistance, and my favorite, an 8th grade civics class from Brookhaven Middle asking if they could come interview me for their Local Heroes project. I was deeply honored, but I also knew it wasn't over. Not until it was official. So I called for a town-wide HOA community review meeting, an open forum where HOA board actions could be challenged in front of public. It hadn't been used in years, but I found the clause buried in their own bylaws, Section 9.1.3, which allowed any member in good standing to call for a community challenge, provided at least 15 signatures were submitted to the HOA board. I submitted 73. Karen had no choice but to comply. I booked the Brookhaven Community Center's main hall, the same place where we used to hold high school dances back in the 70s. It smelled of lemon polish and mothballs, with a few sweet memories lingering in the air. I set out folding chairs, rented a PA system, and printed programs. The stage was set for the showdown of the century. The guest list swelled quickly, Neighbors, students, historians, reporters, and even some folks I hadn't seen in years made their way into the meeting. Pastor Michael arrived with a stack of pies. The mayor sent his aide, and the county clerk brought along the original land survey map from 1875, which included the Becker homestead and a marked community well site. By 6 p.m., we had over 200 people packed into the hall. Some stood along the back wall, others perched on windowsills, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Karen and the HOA board members sat at the front, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Karen was in her usual crisp beige blouse and pearls, but the air control she usually wore had slipped. She looked more rattled than confident. I took a slow, deliberate step into the room, wearing my father's old work jacket and a blue ribbon pin from the Kentucky Historical Society. I stepped up to the microphone, the room falling silent. "Good evening." I began, my voice cutting through the stillness. "My name is Amanda Becker. You all know me. I taught your kids, I chair the library fund, and I make a mean lemon chess pie. But more than that, I'm a daughter of this soil. My family has lived on that land since before Brookhaven had paved roads." I paused, taking a breath. The well behind my house? My great-great-grandfather dug that in 1874. It saved lives, it raised families, and now is under threat by a group who claims to serve the community but serves only aesthetics. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. I held up the state registry certification, the heritage designation letter from the governor's office, and a sealed letter from the Brookhaven Health Department, stating that the water from the Becker well tested above state quality standards and could be tapped in emergency drought conditions. Now, I continued, you've heard their reasoning, that it's unsafe, that it's unsightly, but I have proof otherwise. I clicked the remote, and the projector lit up with slide after slide of old family photos. There was my great-great-grandfather standing proudly beside the well in 1902, my grandmother holding me as a baby next to the stone rim, and dozens of newspaper clippings, official stamps, and academic endorsements, each piece of history glowing with significance. Then came the bombshell. I showed the crowd an email forwarded to me anonymously from someone within the HOA planning committee. The email read, "If we can get the Becker well removed, that area would make an ideal site for our proposed meditation pavilion. Property values would spike once that eyesore is gone." Gasps filled the room. Several people turned to Karen. Her face drained of color. I wasn't done yet. I also filed a formal complaint with the State Board of Preservation. I said, my voice steady, the HOA's violation of protected historical site statutes cannot be ignored. The board responded that same day. Any demolition, interference, or structural alteration of a registered heritage resource is a felony under Kentucky state law. HOA enforcement does not supersede this protection. The room grew even quieter, and Karen's face tightened with the weight of her actions. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were now part of something much larger. It wasn't just a fight for the well anymore. It was a fight for the truth, for justice, and for the future of the community. Karen had underestimated what this well meant, not just to me, but to everyone who understood the value of history. I turned to Karen, my voice calm yet unwavering. You tried to erase my family's legacy for a vanity project. You bullied an old woman with fabricated ordinances, and you forgot the most important thing about small towns like ours. We remember. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes locked on her. Then a single clap echoed from the back. It was Mrs. Patterson, 92 years old, cane in hand, her fierce glint never fading. The applause rippled outward, quickly followed by cheers. One man whistled so loudly the sound rattled the windows. Karen stood there, visibly shaken. "This is slander," she stammered. "This whole meeting is a setup." But the room had already turned. People began shouting over her, "Resign! Shame on you! You lied to us!" The mayor's aide stepped forward, a calm presence in the chaos. He cleared his throat and read from a statement. Effective immediately, the town is launching an investigation into the Crescent Ridge HOA's handling of historical properties, including any unauthorized access or attempted demolition. In the meantime, we request all HOA enforcement actions be suspended until further notice. Karen slumped back into her seat, her usual air of authority dissipating. Her clipboard lay forgotten in her lap. As the meeting wrapped up, people came forward one by one to shake my hand, hug me, and share their own family histories. A few brought old photos and asked if I thought their barns or smokehouses might qualify for preservation. One woman cried, "You didn't just save a well, you save our pride." And she was right. This wasn't about just a hole in the ground or a row of stones. It was about belonging. It was about standing firm and not letting outsiders in pressed khakis and Pinterest dreams erase the very soul of our community in the name of so-called progress. I stood by the door, watching people leave, my heart full and my shoulders lifted. The fight wasn't over, but we'd made our stand. Kara Matthews had finally realized she wasn't the queen of Brookhaven. The morning after the town hall, I sat in my rocker with a cup of warm coffee, watching the sun rise over the hills. For the first time in weeks, there was no ache behind my eyes, no weight in my chest, just stillness. Then the phone rang. It was Officer Monroe from the Brookhaven Sheriff's Department. He sounded almost cheerful. "Morning, Miss Becker. Just letting you know we've officially closed the investigation, and between us, the HOA is going to have a hard time crawling out of this one." I thanked him and set the phone down gently. Kara Matthews had been suspended from her role as HOA president within 24 hours of the meeting. 2 days later, she resigned completely. The meditation pavilion project she'd been secretly pushing was gone. The proposed fines on my property? Voided. But the most satisfying part? The town council filed a cease and desist order on all HOA enforcement activities until a full audit was completed. Turns out, Karen had been skimming HOA funds for personal landscaping projects, with a community improvement fund that just so happened to pay for a private hot tub installation. By week's end, she was facing formal charges for misuse of HOA funds, trespassing, and willful interference with a state-recognized historical site. As Karen Matthews disappeared from Brookhaven, the transformation within the community was palpable. Her reign had ended, and with it, the oppressive atmosphere she cultivated for so long. The remaining HOA members, who once cowered under her dominance, sought my assistance to help rewrite the enforcement code. I agreed, but under one condition. Every future board member would have to complete a 1-hour heritage orientation with the Brookhaven Historical Society. They needed to understand that preserving roots wasn't an enemy of progress. To my surprise, they agreed. In the weeks that followed, we replaced the HOA's tone-deaf regulations with community-informed guidelines that respected both safety and the town's rich history. Gone were the days of arbitrary fines and clipboard patrols. Instead, we embraced neighborhood forums, potlucks, and walking history tours led by yours truly. And the well, it didn't just survive, it became the heart of the community. On a warm June Saturday, we held a dedication ceremony for Becker Heritage Well. Over 300 people gathered, families, students, old friends, city officials. The ceremony was filled with energy and pride. We unveiled a new oak sign that read, "Becker Heritage Well, EST 1874, a gift from the past, a promise to the future." The air was filled with laughter and music as children ran around barefoot, and the mayor himself shook my hand. People tossed coins into the well, not for water, but for memories. And yes, I cried, not from the victory, but because our town had remembered who we were. Months went by, and Brookhaven began to change in subtle yet profound ways. More people planted native trees instead of store-bought ornamentals. The old post office received a historical plaque, and a retired vet offered to restore the old blacksmith barn on the edge of town. The local high school even started a Roots and Resilience Week, where students interviewed elders about the town's history. And as for me, I found peace. One day, a letter arrived. It was from a state regulatory office. Apparently, Karen's conviction had triggered a review of her actions, not just locally but across the wider Homeowners Association network. It turned out Karen had been lobbying to push similar HOA expansions across neighboring communities, all in the name of stricter codes and higher fines. Her efforts had been quietly undone, and her proposals were now being walked back. Her actions had set a legal precedent, and now she was facing the consequences of her arrogance. The best part? a neighbor in her infinite wisdom, started a wind chime exchange program. Yes, really, people began gifting each other handmade chimes as an inside joke, a playful act of defiance against Karen's reign. Karen's legacy was forever tarnished, not by a confrontation, but by the quiet power of a community that stood up to protect its history, its roots, and its people. Her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of remembering what truly matters. As for the Becker well, it stood strong. We continue to honor it. And when new families moved into the area, I made sure to tell them the story of the well in the town. Brookhaven had grown, evolved, and learned to appreciate the past without letting it hold them back. And that was a real victory, one that would never be bulldozed by an HOA or anyone else who thought they could erase what truly mattered. Thank you for watching Untold Realites. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Thumbs up and comments below.